Hello, everyone, and welcome to the DCL Learning Series. Today's webinar is titled Making the Case for DITA in Pharma and Life Sciences Content. My name is Marianne Calahana, and I am the VP of Marketing here at Data Conversion Laboratory. Before we begin, I do want to share that this conversation is being recorded, and it will be available in the on-demand webinar section of our website at dataconversionlaboratory.com. We invite you to submit questions, comments at any time during today's webinar. We are going to save some time at the end, but don't wait. If something comes to mind, please send your question in. Our panelists have a lot to discuss with you, so let's get right to it. So happy with today's lineup of speakers. I'm happy to introduce my colleague, David Turner. David is DCL's digital transformation consultant. He helps organizations understand the benefits of content structure, semantic enrichment, and content management. Hi, David.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
I'd like to briefly give a little perspective about DCL. DCL services and solutions are all around converting, structuring, and enriching content and data. We are the leading provider of XML conversion services, DITA conversion, structured product labeling conversion, and S1000D conversion. While we are best known for these excellent content conversion services and content structure services, we also do a lot of work in the other areas listed on this slide, things like semantic enrichment, entity extraction, data harvesting, third-party validation for previously converted content, content reuse analysis, and structured content delivery to major industry platforms. No matter the service we provide, we harness the latest innovations in artificial intelligence, including machine learning and natural language processing, to help businesses organize and structure data and content for modern technologies, systems, and platforms. Next slide, please. Our next speaker is Val Swisher, CEO of Content Rules, the global content experts. Hi, Val.
Hi, Marianne. Hi, David. Good morning for me. So thank you for introducing me. I am the CEO of Content Rules, and we are, I think, the oldest content services company in the world. We've been around for just about 30 years. We offer a variety of services, including content strategy, which helps customers move from an unstructured environment to a structured environment, which we'll be talking about today. Global content strategy, if you're going to be taking over the rest of the world. Content development, we have writers and editors and artists and any service you need to create content. And content optimization and transformation, where along with DCL, we help customers take their legacy content that is unstructured and move it into structure and do all the other things that the DCL conversion doesn't do, which includes deduping, rewriting, cleanup, that sort of thing. We've been working with DCL for a long time, and I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
And our third speaker is Sophie McMonigal. Sophie is Information Architect at Novo Nordisk. Sophie, we are thrilled to have you with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marianne. Really happy to be here. Thank you very much. So I'm the Information Architect at Novo Nordisk. I think Novo Nordisk, many may have heard of already, but we're a Danish pharmaceutical company celebrating our 100th anniversary, in fact, this year, focusing particularly on diabetes and rare diseases, so cardiovascular, hemophilia, obesity as well. You may have heard of Novo Nordisk in the news with Wegovy and Ozempic. So, really happy to be representing Novo Nordisk today. My background is actually mostly in IT, so I have around 17 years of structured content experience. So DITA is my DITA XML is my baby. So I think I'm talking today from Novo Nordisk's experiences and our very ambitious vision, I think, in terms of adopting structured content, but also my history with other companies and you know, my journey with DITA as well.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go away, and I really look forward to this conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you so much. And I am excited, and as Sophie hit on there, it is nice to have a couple of different perspectives today. What we wanted to get at was the idea that you know, this concept of structured content in pharma and life sciences has been getting a lot of traction, a lot of awareness. But because of the many different applications for structured content, there's a ton of different standards, and it can just feel really overwhelming. So when a pharma company wants to start working with structured content, a lot of times it can be confusing. They don't know exactly where to start. So the purpose of this webinar is to talk about a flexible architecture called DITA XML that could possibly be used for this purpose. Sophie has a perspective, well, obviously she's worked in other companies, but you know, she brings this perspective of working at Novo Nordisk, who has undertaken this project with DITA. And then Val has broad experience in working with some other clients who've used both DITA and tried some other things. So that's kind of where we're coming from today. A quick disclaimer: whatever XML model you use is driven by your specific use case. Okay, we're not saying today that DITA is for everybody. There could be compelling reasons to use a different model. You know, DCL, we have partners who we love and do a lot of work with who have great tools which do not use DITA, but are maybe based on a custom XML model or on DocBook XML, for example. But the purpose of this particular webinar is to offer a consideration for the merits of a DITA-based approach. So we're going to divide this up into 4 parts. I'm going to let Val go in and define our terms for us. Then we're going to discuss just kind of the case for structured content in general. Then we're going to get into some of the reasons why Sophie's team chose DITA, why some of Val's clients have chosen DITA, why it might make sense for you. And then we'll wrap it up with a summary at the end and do some Q&A. So like Marianne said, please start adding those questions right now, and we'll dig in and make it happen. So we do have a lot to cover. It's going to be kind of high. It's going to be kind of high level, quick paced, but hopefully it'll be good. So Val, I'm going to turn it over to you, and why don't you give us a quick high level overview of what is this structured content? What are we talking about here in our definitions?
Sure. Well, let me introduce structure by first talking about what unstructured content is. Unstructured content is what we're used to. It's when we basically start at page 1 and just keep going until we hit page 320 or whatever. It is written, updated, stored, managed, published, and translated as one big monolithic document. Historically, we've had unstructured content for a lot longer than structured content. One of the things to keep in mind, and this is really important, is that in unstructured content, you combine content and format. So what it is, what you see is what you get. And if you need multiple formats, then you have to have multiple copies of that same unstructured content. So keep that in mind. It's created using all the tools we know, Google Docs, Word, etc. So to contrast, structured content is content that's created in small chunks. We call the chunks components. You may hear them called topics. You may hear them called fragments. You may hear them called blocks. Call them whatever you want, but they are small chunks. And they are tagged individually with metadata, which is another thing to think about with unstructured content. In most unstructured content situations, you can only tag the file. And if your file has 52 pages, good luck finding the information you need quickly. It is separate from format. So your text is truly your text. That means that from the very same file, that one chunk block fragment, you can publish to a variety of formats. Very important. It's organized, it's stored in a central repository.
So specifically then, what is DITA?
Okay, So there are many ways to create and use structured content. And most of the ways that we work with in the content world are based on XML, which is a markup language. DITA, which stands for Darwin Information Typing Architecture. Maybe Sophie can tell us how they came up with that name. DITA, think of DITA as a subset of all the possibilities that XML offers to you. So it is a subset. It was introduced by IBM. Sophie was there. And it has become the de facto standard for structured content. So that means that, first of all, it's an open standard, which makes it much easier to create tools. There is a large ecosystem of tools that support DITA. There are known methods for doing things. In fact, DITA, the subset of the various elements and attributes, they're semantically classified, which means a task is actually called a task and a concept is actually called a concept. So you don't have to really worry about, gee, what is that? And you can classify those different types of elements and things using semantic structure.
And Val, you stole my thunder a little bit here. I was going to take us back here to the early 2000s and, the fun stuff that was around. And as you mentioned, I know that in the early 2000s, it came from IBM. And as you mentioned, Sophie was there. So here's a picture from back then. So I was going to just ask you quickly here, since you were there. I read an article by the great Elliot Kimber, who gave a couple of different things about what the initial goals were. And first of all was this idea of enabling interoperability without having to require strict agreement between sources, right? So you could have your data, somebody else could have their data, and it'd be flexible enough for that. And then the other big one was just enable this reuse. How does this track with what you remember and your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I wasn't there in 2001 in the labs, but I did join the IBM Hersley Labs 2006, and they had previously been in SGML and DocBook. So they were just actually migrating a majority of the content into DITA. So reuse was absolutely massive as a driver, because we were looking at, I mean, the product I was on was an old mainframe product, transaction processing, and we had 30,000 topics. And every release, we would have to replicate those topics. So sometimes the only thing that changed was the product number. Version 1 to version 2 to version 3, as soon as you can actually start capturing those pieces and saying, okay, well, we create that as a variable, and we can update just the version number, it makes your content really portable, really reusable. So it was a really big deal. And that wasn't my badge photo, but it was, I think I had my student photo for many, many years, but that was the time.
You're taking away the magic of the movies here. All right, so we hit our quick definition: structured content, unstructured content, data. Let's just talk about the case for structure. And I think the big question that always comes up, especially when we're talking to people in pharma and life sciences, is why structured content? Why not just Word? Or in a nutshell, what's the value of this? Anyway, so Val, I thought this might make a great start for you, and maybe a great new series on Netflix or something. What's the value? I've already put it into my list there. Obviously, you're working with more and more organizations who are implementing structured content. What is the value?
There's so many values to structured content. Let's talk specifically about life sciences. Today, it's the same in every industry, but let's just talk about life sciences since we're here for that. In the current ecosystem, as your medical writers create information and update information, often they need variations of that same document. In addition, there are pieces of content that need to appear in many documents over and over and over again as your drug product moves through its life cycle, its regulatory life cycle. So the way things work today is your authors write something, and eventually what they write goes to the health authorities, who inevitably come back and say, you need to make these changes. And then every single place that content appears, you have to find an update. And if you miss one and you're audited, you're in big trouble. And we all know that. It doesn't scale. It's inefficient in every way possible. It's high risk, high risk. That's today.
All right, well, let's talk about a
Instead,
better way then.
yes, that's the better way. If we single source, if we reuse components, fragments, call them whatever, call them Lego blocks, you write it once, you update it one time, and those updates are available immediately in everything that you publish that uses that chunk of content. So the risk is minimized, and the time is cut in, depending on where you are in the process. It can take you a lot of time to find all those versions. If you only need to find one, it's going to be a lot quicker. So it's just a much better way. And let me also say, because I haven't said it yet, I have this whole grouping of chunks. They're stored usually in a structured content management system. I build my output, my documents, by assembling these chunks in a particular order, because the chunk is going to appear in different documents in a different place, and I assemble them, and it's that assembly that becomes the output. But the storage of the content is in individual, single source of truth, reusable chunks of content.
All right, so let's summarize this here.
Benefits: managing and reusing content from a single source of truth. Automating the assembly and the formatting. Remember, if you have different formats, if you're not using structured content, you need a separate copy of that content. So all different formats from a single source. Another thing is using the standard. It's much easier to exchange information. It's also much easier to automate the data science, the data, to come directly into your content, so your medical writers don't have to accidentally type a 3 instead of a 9 or whatever. It's automated. You have traceability, audit trails, every bell and whistle you can imagine. And we can make sure that the content is fair, which is a data standard that we're putting into content: findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable.
The way I see it, based on what you've been telling me here, is that with Word and our current ecosystem, we can obviously do some of these things, sort of, if you kind of work away, but it's the wrong tool for the job. I mean, I can mow my grass with a pair of scissors, but if I've got, like a little bitty yard, or if I'm in the UK, a little bitty garden, maybe that works. But if I live on Val's property, out in Napa, or have a yard like this, it could never work. So, when you look at reuse, yeah, maybe you can do some reuse with Word, but it's copy and paste, so it's extremely limited. This automated content assembly, that doesn't really happen with Word. Single source publishing, okay, I can save it as a PDF. Maybe I can save it as an HTML file if I really, really target those styles or what have you. But Yeah, pretty limited. Automated convergence of content data, limited. Future proofing, no, it doesn't do any of those things. Interoperability, I think that's the big one there. So that's kind of our case for structured content, if you will, not specifically DITA, but just structured content in general. We do have some resources that are available if somebody would like to check those out. We have 2 white papers from Content Rules that are over in the handout section, so feel free to download those. And then Leanne is going to put into the chat some links to a couple of other webinars that we've done and to a blog post that we have. So feel free to contact us on those, and we can talk about these resources and others. Sophie, before we get into the actual case for DITA, let's talk a little bit about your structured content use case. So I know that at Novo we've talked a little bit about this this idea of this next gen labeling vision. What was behind this? What led you to really at Novo promote this idea of a structured content approach?
Yeah, thanks, David. So I think that the vision was very, very clear from management from the start, and it's actually, I think, really important if you have got a very clear, very simple vision, because everyone can buy into it. So, in pharma, I think it's one of the most important places that your documentation is right. And when we talk about documentation, we're looking at things like the patient leaflet. We're looking at the carton, the label. If you get your dosage wrong, you get your product name wrong, any of those kind of things, you are not only potentially affecting people's lives, but you are also, from a business perspective, looking at a potential recall. So if you're copy pasting, there is always that possibility that somebody is in a hurry, or somebody has not got the time, or has not maybe checked, and you are copy pasting. The other side of that is you have immense quality checks. You have to go through rounds and rounds and rounds of review to make sure what is going out is absolutely accurate. So it was absolutely imperative that the labeling workflow was connected. So it was actually having one shared process for actually delivering the submissions to health authorities, but also preparing for the future, creating smarter ways of working, flowing that all through from our submissions to the carton, to the label, to the patient leaflet, because it's all one and the same. In terms of preparing for the future, it was really saying, okay, so reuse is a huge, huge use case for us. We have portfolios of products. They might all be insulin based, or they might all be hemophilia based, or they might be all based around one active ingredient, for example. You write things naturally in the same way across those texts, but actually when they're in Word, they're slightly different quite often, because a different author has come in and they've said, well, I want to say could rather than would, and this maybe sounds slightly better this way. So people add sort of personality, but also they don't necessarily see what has come before. With that personalization, it means that you can't reuse. So being able to reuse across across portfolios and across the whole of Novo Nordisk, addresses, stock statements, why write those every time? Why make your affiliates actually have to write that thing when that's the thing that they add every single time on top of the text that's been provided by HQ. Copy paste I've already spoken about, but also, just to expand a little bit on that future, the world is progressing. It's not just word output. It's not just in-design, for print. We want to be able to publish to HTML, to e-labeling, to apps, to digital media, not just what the health authorities are asking, but what our customers want. Investing in things like animations for showing exactly how you put the pen lid on, how you take it off, how you administer your drug, so that, we are actually creating an infrastructure so that we can extend, and we're not just at the mercy of the next output type that the health authorities want, be that XML for the US, or Word for another country, or some other media.
Let's take the part about the creating smarter ways of working a little bit. I like this this slide that I saw in a presentation that you gave. What's in it for the Novo Nordisk employee who's working with kind of this end-to-end labeling process? What were you guys hoping to accomplish there?
Yeah, and this was very much a drive from the business side, in terms of they spend a huge amount of time reviewing. There is no, well, there are fewer industries that are more regulated than pharma. Okay, so in terms of having to review, perform QA, it takes a lot of people, it takes a lot of approval cycles, you know, so they're very much looking at this is once, if you create something once and it's locked, you know, the rounds you need to review are much fewer because there is no debate about it. You see it in context of everything else. Fewer handovers. So that was a bit about the process side of things, having things in, you know, in one place so that you're reviewing, you're editing all in the context of the same thing. Reducing the number of sisters so there are fewer handovers. Transparency, so actually that's actually seeing again with that reuse and with workflows that are alongside that what the impact is. Val, you talked about metadata. You know, we've added so much metadata to our content so that you can search and filter it, but also so that we can trigger events. So we know that if the EU has been signed off, that will trigger other projects through the reference metadata that we've got in there. So it's actually that transparency. Better overview of the labeling flow. Again, that's kind of transparency. Collaboration. So actually having an editing environment where we can actually collaborate, you know, easy workflows. I won't go through all of it, David, but that was the kind of flavor of how can we make the business easier? You know, how can we actually simplify, add transparency, align, all in one.
Yeah, which this is huge because I think a lot of times people hear about these kinds of initiatives and they think about it from the perspective of, you know, there's a business benefit, but they don't think about the actual person, you know, that's actually working with the content. And there are a lot of benefits for that person as well. So, but I want to now get on quickly before we move into the DITA part. You use that term reuse over and over and over again. And I recall you had this very compelling reuse use case, which I've tried to illustrate here. Can you take a couple of minutes to maybe walk through this slide, what we're seeing here, and kind of this concept of how, you know, a single source update might require updating 50 to 100 other documents individually?
Yes, and I alluded a little bit to this before. In terms of, you know, we have these drug families, so it might be that you're working in the diabetes portfolio, and within that portfolio you've got three or four drugs more that all have the same, you know, they all have maybe the same core content to some degree, but their product name changes. So you've got, you know, drug A, drug B, drug C. One of them has a 10 milligram tablet, one has a 20 milligram. For another, it's maybe that you are using a solution for injection, or you might have a different presentation for one of those drugs. You might have 4 or 5 of those presentations. It might be a vial, it might be, you know, there's all sorts of, but we'd call that a presentation. So it's, you know, it's the dosage and the way that that's administered in one. Then once you start layering up after that, you know, we serve nearly every country around the world. So all of those countries will have at least some of those drugs within that drug family, and they'll have some of the presentations that are shown out of that list, if not all. And then once you look at that as a submission, so the submission itself has to get signed off by the health authority. Everything in that submission goes onto either the package leaflet, the carton, or the label. It is locked at that point. So it is absolutely your source of truth, what you have submitted. And then you're free to put that onto those, you know, onto those pieces of documentation. As you say, you've got here, it might be some countries also need HTML. So they need to be able to publish that same information on a website. It needs to be accessible. So it has to have alternative text. It has to have active links. It's the same information, but it's rendered in a different way. I mentioned this animation, so we are also investing in other formats. It might be a mobile app, it might be an animation. It's exactly the same text. So once you start layering up all those millions actually of differences going from a product family, and you think, no wonder people struggle with Word, and no wonder you have this, you know, when you have the smallest update, it might mean 50 to 100 documents that you actually have to update. You know, so it's a very, very compelling use case in pharma, I think, because this is really standard. You know, you look at just some text like keep out of the reach and sight of children. That text is on every single drug that we put out there. I understand a few years ago that the EU changed that from keep out of the reach and sight, sorry, keep out of the sight and reach to out of the reach and sight. Now, can you imagine the impact of that very, very small change across an entire company? So yes, I think the vision for me is one of the clearest I've ever seen. It's a very, very compelling view. And then just to put it,
I was going to say, now talk us through this slide.
Of course, David. Yeah, and this is kind of just sort of rounding it all up and putting it into perspective. So, you know, the project I work on is next-gen labeling. We are basically putting together a content management system. So that is the structured content side of things alongside the artwork management system. So I said we're looking at this end-to-end workflow, being able to pull our content that we submit that is actually in DITA XML, pulling that through to the carton. So actually being able to output to, and Val talked, you know, very nicely about the outputs we've got there. We've talked about it in different situations, but being able to generate a Word document from that content, but also generating an artwork PDF in InDesign and being able to preview that at the point of writing. So I'm writing a label text. I can then see in context, because I've sucked that content through, what that actually is going to look like on my carton or label. Is this going to overflow? Is this something that is not going to be translatable into German, because German is going to be very verbose and it's going to take up a lot of space? So actually making things very tangible in terms of what you're actually experiencing, what you're writing. Yeah.
All right. Well, Val, let's bring it back to you here, because you know, I've seen this slide on some webinars we've done together before. We've talked a little bit about Sophie's specific use case here. Broaden it out. How do you see that comparing to kind of this ecosystem that we've talked about before?
Well, sure. So what Sophie is describing is in this slide. It starts with labeling all the way to the left and goes through and goes to regulatory and comes back and then goes out to the packaging or wherever. So, wow, look at that. That's fancy. So what this slide is trying, I like it. What this slide is showing is that in addition to labeling, we have clinical and we also have CMC. Again, we share content between clinical, labeling, and CMC. And there is absolutely no reason to be copying and pasting this content. And if we think that it gets complicated in labeling, which it is very complicated if you're copying and pasting, expand that to all the other 10,000 pages of content that have to accompany a drug product to regulatory. So this is just showing, it's very simplified, but this is the ecosystem that you would be looking at, where everybody uses the same structured content management system. That's where all of the components, the blocks, are stored. There's an authoring interface. I think we're going to talk about that a little later. You can publish whatever the regulatory agency wants. They want Word, you publish to Word. They want a PDF, you publish to PDF. It can go into your RIM system, so you can keep track of what you've sent to regulatory. Ultimately, when the drug is approved, it will then go to whatever, as Sophie said, your customers need. It could be, obviously, it's going to be the labeling and packaging, but you could have safety information, education, marketing, electronic health records. I'm excited about the possibility of publishing to apps. I think that that's, you know, the wave of the future. We're doing it now, but it's so cumbersome. It's so much easier and less risky and faster, and it's all the things. So this is sort of where we're going on a broad scale.
And I love that approach, because you know, with Sophie's example, we talked about a specific area, which is a pretty big area with a lot of benefit, you know, this labeling. But you can also step back and say, you know, there's also value for clinical trials to do this. There's also value for, you know, quality to do this. And then there's value to bring all of those together. And one of the things I guess maybe we can hit on when you talk about DITA that's interesting is that, you know, if you've got the clinical trials people that say, oh, wait, I don't want my I don't want to have to be forced to use, you know, what labeling's using, and because we have different needs. Well, you know, you got a flexible format or, you know, architecture like DITA, you can actually do that. But anyway, that's enough about that. So we've done our definitions. We've done our kind of intro to, you know, benefits of structured content. Let's actually now take this now into the case for DITA, because, you know, Sophie, you did actually choose DITA for several reasons. And when we talked ahead of time, you actually gave me a whole list, but we whittled it down to just these kind of 6 things. So with that, let's jump right in, and we'll hit the first one there, reuse. As we mentioned, DITA, compared to other XML models, is really built for reuse. So what are we seeing here on this particular slide?
Yeah, and I have to give credit to my business colleagues for pulling a lot of this analysis together, you know, right at the beginning of our project, because that was looking at what is the use case, what's the business case for actually doing this. So what you're looking at here is a Tresiba patient leaflet. So on one side, you've got sort of all the safety information, why you need to use it, you know, all the sort of precautions. On the other side, you have the instructions for use. So that's, you know, pull off the pen cap, do all those kind of things. So Tresiba here, it's showing that around, we worked out about 70 to 80% of the content is identical to another of the drugs in our portfolio called Fiasp. So the only pieces that are in white are the pieces that are unique. And even in some of those cases, it's only the product name. And actually, they didn't even look further to say, well, actually, is it just that something's slightly different, or it is, you know, it is significantly different? You'd expect things like the clinical trial data to be different, but other than that, you know, it's amazing. And particularly if you look at the instructions for use. So Tresiba is actually administered in a pre-filled pen, as are a lot of our insulin products. It's exactly the same way of doing it. It's just they've used different colors. So to be able to swap out the images with the color, because that's very helpful to the user. I know I've got a yellow pen. I can see my yellow pen on my leaflet. You know, it's really good contextual information. But, you know, for Fiasp, it's yellow and red. It's just a device. It just happens to have a different drug in it. So very, very powerful.
Yeah, and you mentioned here, you know, that we can reuse the same content across packaging materials,
Yes.
but you can also reuse similar content across packaging materials, which I think that's really powerful. And then Val, you put out the example here of, you know, you can reuse, you know, not just the sentences, but you can use entire components, sections, and things like that in your different regulatory documents. Oh, you're gonna say something there, Val? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I recently, one of the white papers that we put out was the CDS is dead, long live the CDS or CCDS. Right now, companies who are using Word essentially use the CDS, whatever you call it, as a repository. It's a Word document that contains all these little sections. And then to create other documents, for example, the USPI, the SMPC labels, they copy and paste out of one Word document into another Word document and then tweak, and who knows what happens. In a structured environment, there is no CCDS as an entity, because each one of these little components lives in a repository. You want to pretend you need a CCDS? Fine. Print them all out. Make an assembly that's a CCDS. You don't need it anymore, but if it makes you feel better, sure. But the point is, you need to use the same content, and doing it in Word makes no sense. Doing it in DITA is the way to do it. So that's what this slide is trying to show.
All right, but honestly, can't you do reuse with any XML? I mean, we don't really see reuse with JATS XML and scholarly publishing, because they call reuse in scholarly publishing, they have another name that's plagiarism. But you know, you can do reuse with, you know, custom XML schemas. I know one partner that does that. You could do it with DocBook. What is it that makes DITA special when it comes to this reuse?
So I'll chime in, and then Sophie, you may have additional things.
Sure.
DITA, so to me, the most important point about DITA is that it is a standard, an open standard. It's not custom XML. You can do great things with custom XML, but you can't interoperate with anything. And as we like to say, when you take standard DITA, every specialization that you make to that standard DITA makes it less and less interoperable with anything else. So it's all about I'm writing, creating to the same standard. And that is very special, and it's very important. And the standard exists today. There are some efforts underway to create a new XML standard. I don't know why. There are lots of tools available. It's an ecosystem. And DITA is very unique in this part of the content industry. So Sophie, I don't know if you want to add anything, but to me, that's the best thing.
Just to add on that, I think it actually requires less deep XML skills. There's an awful lot out of the box you can just use. So you actually have all of these, and it absolutely, ties into what you're saying, Val. But from a perspective of, can I just go and get started? Okay, you need a little bit of skill, but you don't need to have absolutely deep XML knowledge. You can actually go and use what's there, and there's a huge amount of tooling around that will actually help you do that, and a huge community as well that will help too. Yeah. So it really does make a difference, and it's, the skills are easier to come by because, as you say, it's an open standard. People invest in it.
And I'll say this too, just about the reuse part of it. DITA was designed for reuse. That when most custom XMLs are not necessarily designed for XML. DocBook, or for reuse. DocBook has some reuse, but is not designed specifically with that purpose. In fact, DITA was meant to be an improvement on some of that. So that's something I would add. But actually, Val, you kind of hit us into the next idea of this idea about open standards. And so my question was, what makes DITA special here? And I think I'll just take this one here. The things I think about are things that that you guys have mentioned, right? It's got one of the largest communities out there. 20 years of lessons to be learned. You're not going to be reinventing the wheel here. There's tons of available tools, add-ons, and I think of critical importance, there's a large pool of DITA developers out there. Sometimes when you get into other XML models, it gets hard to find, that development talent. Let me talk a little bit just quickly about the community. One of the things that I think is really impressive in the DITA world is this whole concept of the DITA Open Toolkit. I've got a link here to that if you want to go to that, but it's a place where there are pre-built transforms, resources, documentations that can give any organization a real head start. You want to go DITA to HTML, there's code that you can adapt for that. You want to go DITA to InDesign, there's code that you can adapt for that too. It's not like you're starting from scratch because there's that great community. And then, tool set wise, oh, it didn't change, there we go. Tool set wise, where DITA has other other types of formats beat is the tool set. The DITA community has by far the most available tools, add-ons when you compare it to any other information standards. There are robust XML editors, there are robust content management systems, there are robust publishing systems, all of that. So as an open standard, DITA really steps up. Another one that you mentioned, Sophie, was this concept of single source publishing. So DITA is especially good at creating multiple publishing outputs from a single source file. What did this mean for you at Novo Nordisk?
I think, looking back to that original image we had around the drug, and then the presentation, and then going out to the health authorities, and then out to the packaging leaflets, we today are publishing to Word because that's what the health authorities want. However, Many health authorities are now moving to XML. They're using FHIR standard. FHIR is an XML standard, basically. So we are now looking at DITA to DITA XML to another form of XML. So immediately there's huge value there in having our content in an XML framework. The Word is actually one of the hardest things to do. That is a really hard transform. But the fact is we're not having to do it many, many times. We're keeping all of that source in one place. PDF, you mentioned HTML. We're using the DITA Open Toolkit. It's an amazing resource. Absolutely fantastic. And what I love is that I can do that locally as well. So from a local tool, I can just whip off a web page and see how my output looks. You've got XLIF there, right? So XLIF is perfect for translation, but actually most of our translation companies can work with DITA as well. It's common standard. You're at the e-package leaflet apps, it's about having a machine readable, and you're coming onto machine readable format, I know, but it's machine readable and human readable. The value in that is absolutely immense, because it means that suddenly you can automate, you can send things to these different formats, different outputs, but you will edit and work in your daily life within the source in that component content management system.
So Val, that brings us to the hard question for you. If all XML separates content from design, what is it that makes DITA particularly well suited for this?
Well, I think it's all the things we've been talking about. It's purpose built for this. It was designed for single source publishing. It's an open standard. The DITA Open Toolkit is a resource that I have not seen in any other content standard to be used that way. It's truly all of the things. It's, as Sophie was saying, it's machine readable. We'll get to that. It's also human readable. Semantic tagging is a big deal. If you've ever done tagging without semantic tagging, then you can see what a big deal being able to tag things semantically is. That's part of what really makes it human readable. The flexibility that it provides in terms of the output, it's XML to XML or XML to anything else you can dream of. And if there's not a standard way to do it today, then DCL can do it for you. There's no doubt about it. XML to anything. For example, a step can be, if you have a list of tasks, a step can be presented in different ways for different uses. What you can go down to the minutest piece of information and make it look however you want. So it's very powerful.
I think, yeah, it's modular and it's hierarchical, so you can put sections under other sections and put those things together. It's really built for that component piece, which makes it really good for that output. It also makes it good for this concept of data publishing that we hear about a lot. Sophie, talk to us a little bit about this idea of publishing data, things that you don't necessarily want writers to be writing on, writers to be editing, I should say.
Yes, so we talk about the reuse components that come for free almost with DITA. So content references and key references essentially. So you can see here you've got a section within the editor. I've taken a screen capture. It's got a little reuse symbol. What that means is that is a content reference. That is a piece of content I've written. It is locked for a normal user because it's been written, it's been signed off, approved, and it is appropriate to be used in multiple places. I just showed the lock icon. You'd see that, there are certain, you could have that at a topic level. You could have it, as Val says, it could be at a phrase level or a paragraph level. You can see in the what is in this leaflet, these are actually all phrases that are taken into a numbered list. So actually they could be used as titles because they're titles on other topics, but they're also numbered lists. And the pieces in green where you've got the product name, Ryzodec, that is my variable, that is my key reference. So that might be Fiast, it might be Tresiba. Suddenly you can see how, I've got a whole topic there, name of the medicinal product. All it contains is keys, because all I ever have in that topic for the EUPI is my product name and my presentation. So I don't actually have to edit that in any way. It will be auto-populated when I start my new drug with my keys, with my, my content references that I can just forget about. And this is the way, we're talking about it in the business, is you get to, as an author, concentrate on the interesting and fun stuff, because everything else is created for you. Your titles are all there, all your set texts are there. You don't have to worry about any of that anymore.
What about tables?
So tables are really complicated quite often, because actually from my investigations, quite often the table data is given at our company in a .text file, which was kind of quite surprising to me. So we ran a project with the biostatistics team. So biostatistics are the guys and girls who look after all of the content that comes out of the clinical trials. And they hold all their data in a SAS database. They have obviously a massive database there in terms of all of the clinical trials that are run. But we ran a project with them to be able to extract for the tables that are required for the labeling, for them to convert that into a DITA table. So we talked about open standard. Everything is out there in terms of how to create a DITA table, and they created some text. They created some script to be able to run so that when we request a table, we can create it as a DITA table, suck it immediately into the content. That bit we're still working on the magickery, but they can create this DITA table that we can pull into the document and lock it. So isn't that amazing then, to be able just to pull in the whole of the data? There is no question that is exactly the data that Biostat have given us, and it's an entity that can just be used in situ.
I love that. I love that. Let's talk just quickly about metadata. We could do a whole webinar on metadata. I think with DITA, the big things are that, it was, again, designed to be modular and customizable without, without breaking things in the operability. Sometimes you have to change elements and create individual things in other XML models, where DITA gives you some really flexible metadata. So it's going to do, empower your search, and it's going to empower your filtering, things like that. That's most metadata. It really helps to empower your outputs without breaking the model for your interoperability. So you might put things in output classes so that, the system knows if it's going to this country at, in this instance for this kind of deliverable, this text should be colored this way. And if it's going to this deliverable, it should be styled like that. The metadata really, makes that happen. The metadata is what really empowers that reuse and obviously so much more. Let's quickly talk about the last one here, because I want to make sure we do have time for questions here. I love the concept of, DITA being both machine readable and human readable. We talk a lot about the machine readable part, but not always about the human readable part. And I think what we mean is, the nice thing is that non-technical people can work with DITA. Technical people can work with DITA, and they can take it to the nth degree, but non-technical people can do it as well. And so you had a quote that said, the way that we're going to win people over in this move to structured content is when they learn they don't have to be a tech writer. Talk a little bit about what you mean by that, and kind of the importance of this.
And I think the way we've been handling this is looking at what are the key activities. So if you are reviewing and collaborating, then you should be able to do that without having to get into the midst of the content. So having a platform where you can actually, for a majority of cases, review, collaborate, propose text, that kind of thing. And then having another perspective that is, okay, I need to edit my content, but do I need to edit the reuse? Probably not. Maybe that's actually a more skilled role that would actually think about what is the impact of what I'm doing here. So actually being able to go into one of the many editors that are provided with DITA, being able to go in, not have to worry about the XML that's under the covers, because already out of the box, DITA has sections, it has paragraphs, it has things that actually very easily relate to a Word document today. So you showed, you showed one editor view. Where I would sort of just say, word of caution is, the more reuse you have in there, the more you need to govern your reuse. You don't get reuse for free. So you can go in and you could actually use DITA and not worry, if you didn't worry about reuse at all, You could just absolutely create your paragraphs, your sections, you know, absolutely no technical knowledge required at all. Where you invest in reuse, I think you do need a little bit more skill, and you need to think about a mindset change more than a technical writing sense, in terms of, okay, what is the impact of this if I create it as a Word document, as an HTML? I am not viewing the actual thing here that I am going to be publishing. I am writing the words. This is the raw content, and then what I am publishing to is going to render, you know, what that will actually look like at the end of the day. So it's still a big mindset change, but it is much less, you know, involved than actually being an XML expert.
And I'm afraid we're running out of time, so we'll have to cover this last little bit kind of quickly here, but it is also machine readable, as we've talked about before. So if you've got other content management systems around the world that are maybe based on other standards, the nice thing about going with DITA is that it can talk and work with all of those. So just a really quick high-level review. We talked about unstructured content, we talked about structured content, we talked about DITA. And then we specifically got in and we talked about why not just Word, and really said the whole idea of structured content is better. And then we went in and we made the case here that really what kind of sets DITA apart is this reusability, the fact that it's got this open standard and community, single source publishing. It's built for that. It's built for data publishing. It's got very flexible metadata, and then it's human and machine readable, much more beyond what other systems and other architectures are. So quick high level overview there. We're a minute or so behind here, Marianne, but I think that still gives us some time for some questions. Did we get some questions in?
We do have some questions. I know we're not going to get through all of them, so I want everyone to know we'll be reaching out to you personally to make sure we answer your questions. So one that came through, and what's the relation between DITA and FHIR? Are they redundant, or do they complement each other?
I think either one of us can, either one of us can answer. The relationship is that they're both standards, and when you're using DITA, you can publish to FHIR, and FHIR is a standard that they're looking at for the health authorities as an interface, as a standard to be used. That's just, I'm trying to answer quickly, but that's as, you know, Sophie, if you want to add, feel free. I'm using a very quick answer for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fine. In terms of, you know, my perspective, it is another XML format. So, you know, the great thing is that it is a standard. So hopefully all of the health authorities will be using, you know, from what I've understood, they will all be using FHIR. So it should make life a lot easier in terms of that transform, that it's actually a, you know, slightly different recipe depending on the health authority, but it all within the same framework.
What are the questions,
right.
Marianne?
Another question, Sophie, did you mention that there's a new XML format authorities are looking into for labeling? Was that FHIR?
FHIR.
Yeah.
I mean, I just meant different countries are at different levels of maturity. So, you know, US and Canada, Japan are a long way along. EU is slightly further behind, but everyone will come along, I think, in due course. Certainly the major ones. So.
Okay, this is a big question, so I think you're going to have like 10 seconds each. But what's prevented Pharma from adopting structured content management, authoring, distribution processes and tools? Is it the complexity? Is it change management? Why is it different now? Why are we talking about this now?
I have a whole soapbox about this.
Yeah.
I know you're really surprised. My opinion is the reason we haven't been successful with this up until now is the authoring environment and the tooling. That up until very recently, and I'm going to say very recently, like 4 years ago-ish, in order to use DITA, you really needed to understand DITA. There was no way around it. And as Sophie explained quite well just a few minutes ago, you can now use DITA without knowing what's under the covers. There will be people that still need to understand it. Don't get me wrong, as Sophie rightly said. But I think that the main reason is that we were expecting medical writers to be quasi-coders in the past, and now the tools are much more simple to use, much simpler to use. So,
Right.
so cool.
Well, thank you, everyone. We do have some more questions. We're going to follow up with those of you who've submitted something. David, can you bring us on home here?
Yeah, let me just give a quick shout out here. We've got a new industry group that has just started. If you're a part of DIA, there's a new structured content reference model group that's just started meeting. The next meeting is tomorrow, I think. If you're interested in that, put that in the chat, or you could send me an email, dturner@dclab.com. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to get you involved in that. And then just with that, let me just say thank you to Val and to Sophie. We're so excited that everybody was here. This will be available online. And Marianne, is there anything else I'm supposed to say?
I just want to thank everyone for attending this webinar and would like to remind everyone that the DCL Learning Series comprises webinars, a monthly newsletter, and our blog. You can access all of these things and recordings on our website at dataconversionlaboratory.com. We hope to see you in future webinars. And to end everything, I would like to wish Sophie the warmest of birthday wishes today. Thank you so much. May you have lots of cake later today in your future. This concludes today's webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.